Before we dive into today's episode, I want to say a big thank you to our sponsor, PensionBee. Between juggling work, parenting, the school run, and figuring out what's for dinner, sorting out your pension is probably at the very bottom of your list. But here's the thing, future you deserves a bit of love too. That's where PensionBee comes in. They're a leading online pension provider, making it easier for people, especially single parents like us, to feel confident about saving for retirement. Whether you're employed, self-employed, or somewhere in between, they make it simple to combine old pensions into one easy to manage plan. Make flexible contributions in a few clicks and choose a plan that aligns with your values. You can manage it all from their easy to use app, which honestly feels like a little win in your day. And we know single parents are experts at celebrating the little wins. So, if you've got old pensions floating around in the ether, or you've just never got round to opening one, this is your sign. Head to pensionbee.com/UK or download the app to get started. It only takes a few minutes, and trust me, future you will thank you for it. Just remember, as with all investments, your capital is at risk. Thanks again to PensionBee for supporting this episode. Hi, I'm Zoe Desmond, the founder of Frollo, the award-winning app for single parents that features both community and dating modes. And I'm also co-author, along with my wonderful friend Rebecca Cox that I made through Frollo, of the book How to Be a Happy Single Parent. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Frollo podcast. Today we're joined by Rachel Kelly, mental health advocate and author of The Gift of Teenagers, Connect More, Worry Less. This is a book full of calm, compassionate wisdom for parents navigating the teenage years. Rachel is a parent of 5, and in this book, she draws on her personal experience as well as interviews with teenagers, teachers, therapists, and neuroscientists. We talk about how to stay connected with your teenager in a noisy, anxious world, and how even in the mess and challenge of adolescence, there are real gifts to be found. If you're navigating teenage years or wanting to prepare yourself for them in the future and looking for guidance, reassurance, and real tools, this episode is for you. Let's get into it. Rachel, welcome to the Frollo podcast.
Thank you very much for having me in. It's great to be chatting.
Well, first and foremost, what inspired you to write your book, The Gift of Teenagers?
Well, I've been involved in mental health since around 2014. I wrote my first book about my own experience of severe depression in my 30s, postnatal. And that book, I was very lucky. It became a Sunday Times bestseller. And after that, I became involved with lots of different mental health organizations. I became an ambassador for SANE and for Rethink Mental Illness and became involved with King's College London. And I was particularly interested in adult mental health, really, but particularly maternal mental health and parental mental health, but really working mainly with adults. But then about 5 years ago, I started getting a lot of messages online, social media, through my charities, sort of saying, parents being in touch, saying, having a problem, finding it very difficult with teenagers right now. They seem to be finding life very difficult. So I slightly pivoted across to sort of trying to understand more about young people, what was going on for them, what was the world they were navigating, what was happening to the teenage brain, but staying as well with this connection between parents and teenagers. So very much looking at the relationship between the two. And yes, and then started researching my new book, The Gift of Teenagers, as you say, talking to adolescent psychiatrists and psychologists, teenagers themselves and teenagers and teachers, and just trying to sort of find out what was happening in their lives and how we as parents could, if we could, enjoy this a little bit more. Because I do think that while it's a difficult period, the reason I call the book The Gift of Teenagers is that we can grow a lot psychologically through this period. And we often grow more when things are tricky. And so it might not seem like a blessing, this period, but it can be a gift to us. And the other reason it can be a gift to us is that we can emerge with a really strong relationship with emerging adults, and this is a great blessing if we can build that relationship. So I think I was coming from quite a sort of positive point of view that we can make this a really good time for us as well. It needn't all be negative.
Oh, well, that is such a lovely starting point. And yeah, it's such a lovely starting point. I love what you said that sometimes we can grow from the most challenging things that happen. And weirdly, I said the same thing the, I just recorded another podcast for Frollo just an hour ago. And that same phrase came up in the recording. So, yeah, so I think that's really, really reassuring. I'd love to know, what was your experience as a teenager? What kind of teenager were you?
Yes.
And what was your parenting? What was your experience with your parents when you were a teenager like?
Well, it is very interesting because often as parents we replicate the parenting we've received. There's that idea of a replicative script. So we can either do pretty much the same, or we can do an adaptive script in which we try and do things a little bit differently. So I'd say that my experience growing up as a teenager is that in some ways there was probably more freedom then than there is now. But one big difference was that I was not nearly so open with my parents as I've been with my children. And it may have been partly because of my own experience of anxiety and depression and my interest in mental health. So I've always been very interested in talking to them about what they're feeling and what does that look like and what their experiences are. I didn't have that so much growing up. I was more having quite an intense time of it, but on my own. And I think that's partly why the subtitle of the book is To Connect More, because
Mm,
I think that it's a very intense experience, a very intense time for young people, especially now, and feeling things very deeply. That's one of the changes happening to the teenage brain, is this very intense. They are more emotional than us. It's almost like they've got fewer layers of skin. So I think that if I look back at my teenage years, the one thing, and my mother's passed now, but I think I would have loved being able to be more open about my feelings and, romantic feelings. I think especially my feelings around relationships, which I never told her anything. And I think I experienced as a teenager something which is very common, which is quite a lot of shame. And shame is a really difficult one for young people. And the antidote to shame is openness and talking about things. So I think, a burgeoning sexuality and starting having relationships are both areas which, if you can have that connection and that openness, I wished I'd had that more with my mother. And my father was, yeah, I was never going to have it with him, but I
yeah.
might be able to have it with my mum. But that's something I wished for with my own teenagers.
Yeah, that really resonates actually. And my own experience as a teenager, I think if you asked my mother what kind of teenager I was, I think she'd go into a state of PTSD. Um, I think my parents were very, very, very strict, and
Right.
I have three brothers. I'm the only girl, so they were even more strict with me, actually a lot more strict with me. And so I took this approach of, but they also, as well as being strict, I think just, sort of assumed that I was doing, all of this stuff anyway, that I wasn't necessarily doing. So then I kind of got into the mindset of, well, I may as well just break the rules, and I may as well do it because I'm kind of getting accused of it and getting in trouble for it anyway. And obviously that didn't go down well at all. So there was a massive disconnect, a massive, massive disconnect for my teenage years. And it was like, it was a pretty challenging time because of that. So I actually feel so passionate about this book
Yeah.
that you've written, and I also want to soak up everything you have to teach
Oh,
me,
well,
because my son is now 9, and I'm just so aware of just really wanting to make sure that we have an open, honest relationship. And
yeah.
I yeah and I so anything I can do to be his safe harbor, I
Yeah.
want to kind of create that. But yeah, I'm already scared, Rachel. Even though he's 9, I'm already fearful of the teenage years.
Well, a couple of points, because it's very moving hearing what you're saying, and I was thinking about it, which is that it's not just that for you it would have been special if you'd had that greater communication, and for example, around some of the rule setting and boundaries, if you discussed that together and you'd come up together with ideas about what made sense for the both of you, it would have been lovely for you. But another poignant thing I'm thinking, which I remember once coming down into the kitchen and finding my mother in floods of tears, and she just said, "Oh, you're so mean to me. You never tell me anything." And so, what's so interesting about this is it's a two-way thing. It's not just that you as a teenager would benefit from that closeness and connection, and but you, the mother, the parent, you benefit from it too, because it's such strong emotions for you as a mother. A sadness, the rejection, anger, all sorts of things going on for you. So it is a two-way street that you can both benefit from this kind of closer relationship. And look, I have huge sympathy about feeling frightened, because it does feel like it's a frightening world out there. And all the parents that I've been talking to in schools and the groups that have been running and things, that is such a theme of being frightened. But actually, the very best thing you can do for your 9-year-old as he heads towards being a teenager is to deal with those fears yourself, because your best parent, the best parent you can be, is a calm and steady parent. And one of the most interesting interviews I did researching the book, it was with an adolescent psychiatrist, and he had created 3 figures: mum, dad, and child, and a teenager. And the teenager was completely distraught when the 2 figures fell over, because a teenager can be very overwhelmed. So if the parental figures in their life, if their mum or their dad or whoever it is, was also overwhelmed, so if you're in a state and frightened and overwhelmed, your teenager cannot cope with your strong feelings too. So one of the main messages of the book is, how can we put our own house in order? How can we deal with our own emotional regulation and our own tendency to panic and to be fearful? And it's almost become like a status symbol. Like, I'm so worried. And I think when we feel we're worried, well, we think we're doing something, and that's a good thing. But actually, we do better off to look at our own emotional state and find good ways to regulate ourselves and to be calm and steady. And then that will be the best chance to have a good connection with your teenager.
The following is a paid advertisement from BetterHelp. I want to talk about mental health for a minute. Being a single parent comes with its highs and lows, and as single parents, it's so important to make sure we look after ourselves in the process. That's why I'm excited to introduce you to BetterHelp, the online therapy service that's here to support you every step of the way. With BetterHelp, you can connect with registered therapists from the comfort of your own home. Whether you're feeling overwhelmed, stressed, or just need someone to talk to, they're here to help. Plus, as a Frollo member, you get an exclusive 25% off your first month. Just visit betterhelp.com/Frollo. That's betterhelp.com/Frollo. Okay, so but for any of our listeners today, any single parents who are in the teenage years, or who are just about to embark on the teenage years and are at a loss of how to open up that connection or the communication. I actually, the person I just recorded with before this episode is a single mom called Khalifa, and her son is 14. And I mentioned that I was speaking to you after, and I asked her if she had any questions for
Yeah.
you, being the mom of a teenager. And she said, yes. How do I get my son to stop feeling like an alien to me? Because he's, it went from, him wanting to connect and us cuddling on the couch
Yeah.
to him just feeling like an alien who just wants to be behind a gaming console.
Sure.
And I
Well,
feel like there's probably a lot of people who would have similar experience.
Well, I think, we have to go quite deep here. And I think that each individual person, each single parent looking after a teenager, their main relationship and their main connection is with themselves. Now, I know that might sound radical because we so often define ourselves in relationship to other people. I'm somebody's mum, I'm somebody's sister, I'm somebody's partner, I'm somebody's employee, I'm somebody's boss. We so often look at ourselves in relationship to others. And of course, we do have relationships with others, but I remember this was a sort of light bulb moment when a psychologist explained this concept to me, which is you, Zoe, you spend more time with your thoughts and your feelings than with anybody else's. So underpinning this idea of how do we connect? How do we stay close to this? As you say, lots of parents of teenagers feel like they've lost their teenagers. They've gone off down these rabbit holes online. Let's start with you first, and Zoe to Zoe, staying connected to Zoe, and if we can get that relationship in good shape, that's the starting point for a better relationship with our teenager. And I think a big part of acknowledging the primary fact that every single parent, Zoe to Zoe, Rachel to Rachel, is that relationship starts with you, as I say. So, for example, you may have to deal with your own sadness, that it's going to be true that through the teenage years, that there's a wonderful adolescent psychologist called Eric Erikson who talks about individuation. Teenagers are going to be separating from us and they do want their own space. So we're going to have to manage our own sadness and that own feeling of rejection and cope with it and allow it and be with it. And in the book, there's a load of practical strategies of ways to do that. Some of the breathing exercises, just sort of being present to those very strong feelings. And the more present we are and the more we allow them, there's a nice phrase that some of the psychologists use is what we resist persists. So if you're that teen parent and you're feeling that deep sense of rejection, before you go shouting at your teenagers saying, come on, why don't you come out for a coffee with me, or let's go and have a hike together, they're not going to want to do that. That's okay. If you can cope with your own feeling of rejection, deal with that difficult feeling, let it go. One image is quite useful. Sometimes people use it with negative thoughts, but it works with negative emotions too. It's like you're a rock. You, Zoe, are like a mountain. These strong feelings are going to come when you've got teenagers, but you can let them go and just allow them, be present to them, and to let them go. And they cannot ever overwhelm you. They cannot overwhelm you. And then when you're kind of calm, and from a position of calm and centeredness, that's a much better place to start connecting with your teenager. And you can still wish that they would hang out with you. You can have that desire. You may not be able to force it, but you can honor the desire, because I really would love you to come and have a cup of tea with me. And they may well say no, but you can still honor that as long as you're not trying to force them to do it. Because the more you try and force, the less likely they are to do it. And one distinction which parent after parent have told me is so helpful is we're looking for the difference between a request and a demand. So we're not demanding anything, because the more you try and force somebody, as I say, the less likely they are to do it. But there can be a request. Would you consider a cup of tea with me? And if you're coming from a nice calm position, amazing, they might well say yes.
It's actually very powerful the way something is phrased, isn't it? I love that. Would you
Yes.
consider a cup of tea with me is very different to like you're always in this, or why don't it's impossible to get you to spend time with me.
Yeah, and to your point earlier, if your parents already give you a dog a bad, if you've already got a bad name, well, why not just fulfill that? So, you never come and have a cup of tea with me. Why won't you ever do that? Blah, blah, blah. And there's some really interesting bits of research, like consider is a very good word. Would you ever consider? The timing is important. We've got to appeal to their sense of autonomy. So that's a big thing happening to the teenage brain. Is they want autonomy. So as much as possible, we want them to be taking the decision. 9 o'clock turns out to be a brilliant time to communicate with your teenager. You're sort of winding down. You might be going to bed. They're gearing up. Their circadian rhythm is different. They get up later. You're sort of less bossy. First thing in the morning is a terrible time. By 9 o'clock, a lot of parents are winding down. You might already be in your pajamas in bed. They can choose if they come and talk to you. They can choose what they want to talk about. They can choose if they leave. And all these things appeal to their autonomy, and you're not forcing it on them.
I'm just having flashbacks actually to sitting around my kitchen table at nighttime, and that's when the good chats would happen. And it would always seem to be like 10 or 11 at night when the kind of conversations that felt like it was a two-way street seemed to flow. It was definitely that time of day.
Another really simple thing you can do to get that connection is just lower your voice, just rather
Mm,
quietly, because they slightly have to lean in to listen. And they like that because then they're back in control. But of course, we tend to shout. But when we shout, that activates the threat system, and then they're going to shut down. So these are just all little ways. It's almost like imagine them like a sort of a deer. They're going to jump off, but we can make it more likely that they're gonna talk to us. And but again, we can't force it.
yeah. And then what about, because there's the whole kind of autonomy thing and is it individuation? Is that what you
Yes, that's
said?
the word.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And I guess, accepting and respecting that that's going to happen and it's part of their development. But then the thing that scares me most is the safety thing. And, just, I'm sure you've watched Adolescence,
Sure,
that,
sure.
and, I think it'd be interesting maybe to touch on that. And just given the world that we're in today with screens and phones and social media and online bullying and devices, there's, I suppose, that. And then I live in London. I'm, scared of what might happen if, yeah, just there's so many things in the outside world that could happen
Sure.
or go wrong. So how do you navigate all of that? How do we keep our children safe while letting the reins go a bit so that they have what they need?
Well, you're absolutely right, because it is a fine balance between, as you say, the individuation and respecting their need for autonomy. And so the idea of being, stumbling blocks are stepping stones. So we do need to let them make a few mistakes, because that's going to how they're going to learn. So if we reduce, if we try and grip absolutely everything, actually it's not in their best interest. But it is tricky because at the same time they do need some guidance for us, and they do need us to set some boundaries and to be the adults in the room. So we want to sort of navigate this slightly sort of tricky path between them. I'd say there's one overarching, really useful approach which we've got very good evidence for, and it does sort of almost affect everything that parents are frightened about. It affects how teenagers engage with drink, drugs, social media, the kind of company they keep. And this is called the Pygmalion effect. Sometimes it's called the Rosenthal effect. And it's just a really interesting piece of research. And it's about our expectations. If we have high expectations of our teenagers, if we think and we believe and we talk to them setting them up as responsible and sensible people that we have trust and faith in, but we really believe it, they are much, much more likely to take good and sensible decisions in, potentially precarious situations where they might be in danger. And I think that's such an interesting sort of way of what lens you look through when you're addressing all the frightening things in the world, is to have faith in them. And I think a really simple way to sort of generate this feeling of high expectations and high standards that we have for them is bring to mind all their qualities and all their strengths and all the things that you already know are great. I bet there are so many things about your 9-year-old which are just absolutely fabulous. In fact, I'm going goosebumpy because it's such a sort of kind of going with the grain in a way of parental love, is to have that faith and to believe in your child's ability to be strong in these situations.
That is so powerful.
Yeah, and I mean there is the evidence that it works. I mean, obviously there are going to be tricky situations, and we can't completely avoid them. But the more we're straightforward about them, I'll give you an example. Something like drugs. So if you take something like a very common problem for teenage parents at the moment is ketamine. It's very cheap and it's available, and teenagers are drawn to it. You can have a very non-dramatic, remember that concept of your relationship with yourself. So Zoe to Zoe, so nice and calm. You've dealt with your own emotional regulation. As I say, loads of ideas and the gift of teenagers of how to do that. And then a very straightforward conversation about, did you know that, ketamine shrinks your bladder to the size of a pea? You can end up incontinent wearing nappies. You can just introduce in a rather straightforward way some of the realities of the less glamorous side of some of these temptations that teenagers are seeing. And again, trusting them to make quite good use of this information, because remember, we've got high expectations of them. So
Yeah.
look, there'll always be terrible things out there, but we can come from this very steady belief in them.
That's absolutely amazing. And it is. I want to like screen grab that and like just make sure that I keep it there, because it makes complete sense to me. And I suppose the way, and I mentioned at the beginning of this recording that that's the thing. As a teenager, I felt like I was just expected that I was doing everything
Yeah,
wrong anyway. So I had this mindset of, well, I'm sure I may as well.
yeah,
I may as well not, stick to the curfew. I may as well, have a drink, whatever. Well, I may as well go to the party. And I know that with my son, I can already see that he responds really, really well to positive affirmation. And so, it's going to get a different result if I'm like, I would just stop messing around and just, do your homework. Or if I'm like, I'm so proud of the way you focused yesterday, and you can really see that when you put your mind to it,
sure,
you're absolutely amazing. And he does, it's, there's a different result depending on
sure.
how I come at him with things.
I think, and I think there's another sort of very broad, as along with the high expectations, which, as you say, is very relevant for single parents with younger children, but single parents with teenagers, is to do a little bit of research about what's happening to the teenage brain. I've got a chapter in The Gift of Teenagers about what's happening, but there are a few things. So one is risk taking is more prevalent, but you can learn a bit about where risk taking is more prevalent. And actually, teenagers is a little more subtle than it looks. Teenagers tend to take more risks when they're with company. So you can be very practical about, right, okay, so you're going to be going out with that group. I know that, Zoe is a reliable girlfriend of yours. Could we make a plan ahead about what's going to happen if either you or Zoe get into trouble? And you're going to make sure Zoe gets home, and she's going to make sure you get home. So very practical things that if you know that that risk taking is likely to happen. And then the other thing, as we know the risk taking is more prevalent, you can harness it, maybe take them rock climbing, or, go wild camping, or do something which fulfills that teenage need for risk taking, but in a more sensible way. And the same with autonomy, very strong desire in the teenage brain for autonomy. So play to it, harness it, go with it rather than fight it. So don't infantilize your teenagers. Have confidence that they can make, one night a week they should be cooking dinner.
Mm.
By 14, most people could roast a chicken if you ask them. And so you're playing to their strengths, playing to what's happening in their brain, playing to their longing for autonomy. And, got one night off and you're not having to cook.
Happy days, win-win.
Yeah. See, they're the gift. They're the gift. They're the gift.
Yes, I there's a really close friend of mine. We're still very close friends, but we were teenagers together, and her parents had a different style to mine, and it meant that whenever we got in trouble, or whenever there was a sticky situation, or if we were stranded without a way to get home, no matter what time it was, like we always knew that we could call her parents, and
Sure.
we could always tell them, and that always has always stayed with me, noticing how that level of openness and trust meant that it actually kept us safe in really
Mm-hmm.
important situations where we might have not been
Yeah.
safe.
Yeah. And another nice thing you can do is rehearse ahead, almost in a theatrical way, exactly the lines that your teenager can use if they are in a dangerous situation. So one useful thing is that the parent can become an absolute monster. So, say somebody's trying to give them a lift and they've had too much to drink and it's dangerous to get in the car, you need to have the line ahead. So rather than being like a rabbit in the headlines, so a third thing that's happening in the teenage brain, along with the autonomy and the risk taking, is peer pressure. So you want to have a line ahead. So it's like, oh, I'd love to have a lift, and I'm sure you're a marvelous driver, but my mother's a tyrant. She doesn't let me ever take a lift after whatever it is. But you've got your line ahead about whatever it is that could be a risky situation. In the book, there's really quite a lot of sort of navigating the world they're in, and where the risks are. And obviously there's all the risks online, and we haven't talked too much about that, and that is a huge area. I mean, you probably got the gist by now that I'm quite a sort of positive, optimistic sort of person. I think that what seems to work best, again, working with parents and researching this, is that teenagers themselves are not stupid. They know that social media is full of dangers for themselves. They read all the stuff that we read. They know it all too. Again, we want to be appealing to their good sense. And one of the best ways to do it is to say, how do you feel when you've been on TikTok for 5 hours, which is the sort of going rate for a teenage girl right now? How does that make
Wow.
you feel? And it's really interesting because if you've got the basics in place of the good communication for all the reasons we've been talking about, hopefully that will elicit an honest response. And I've not yet come across anybody who says, I feel great after 5 hours on TikTok. I feel absolutely tip top. And that's the way that you're going to start that conversation, because we can do all the parental controls in the world. We can do all the time limits, but in the end, we've got to get them to be in charge of their own social media health. They
Mm.
have got to want to stay well online themselves. And so we've got to get them to be part of the conversation.
Yeah, and in terms of, phones, is there any specific guidance you have around when phones are safe to be brought into the picture, or is it a staggered thing of it's phone, and then after at a certain age they have online access?
It's tricky because the fact is that phones are a fact of life for all of us. They're going to need a phone to buy a train ticket and do their homework and all the rest of it. I think that if you can leave it for as long as possible, if they can have a brick phone so that you can stay in touch and they can do some of those basic things that they do need a phone for. Because if you just say no phones, they can't really run their lives. And the key thing on phones is if you can work with what they call the cohort effect. So if you, Zoe, say to your 9-year-old, you're not having a phone ever, his mental health will actually be worse than all his friends in the class because they'll have got a phone. He'll be the only one that can't talk to them after school and meet up and all the things that, be on the WhatsApps where they're all going to meet, etc., etc. So the cohort effect is if you can work with any other parents, if you can work as a class or on the group chat on the class to come up with similar rules, then you're much more likely to have a good outcome. If you're all doing the same thing, you're working together with other parents. And there are great parent groups now, screen-free childhoods and Less Scroll. There's the nice one I was working with the other day. We're doing a workshop. It's called Less Scroll, More Soul, and that's a lovely one as well. And yeah, so I think you're going to be okay because I think that in a way it's the teenagers quite a bit older than your 9-year-old that are really having the worst of it, and the ones that went through COVID. There's a particular group that are having the very poor mental health outcomes. So the older ones are not so bad off, and the younger ones are not so bad off. But there's sort of children born in around 2003, 2004, 2005. They're having a tough time, and I found that with my own family. So my older boy's 30 now, and my youngest is 21, and the youngest ones, the 3 youngest ones had a much worse time of it, and the older ones found life easier. But I think we're getting there with mobile phones. I think we are getting there, and parents are working together, and that's exciting actually.
Absolutely. I'm so glad to see all of the different campaigns and awareness.
Mumsnet have got a good one at the moment as well. Yeah, there are quite a few of them. There are quite a few of them, and I think it's interesting that teenagers themselves are buying into it. If you do talk to them, and the key question is, how does it make you feel? How does it make you feel? And you're not going to get positive answers.
Yeah. And for single parents like myself who have kids who are going to be sort of teenagers in the next few years, is there anything we can do to set things up, is sort of set things up in a way that sort of ensures that we are sort of building the most stable, trusting relationship so that when it does become that time for the individuation.
Well, funnily enough, I think actually in a way it's not really very different for single parents from any other parents, because in a way, because the teenager is looking to separate from us as figures of parental authority, what I would say is what can be very, very useful is to sort of takes a village to raise a child. And I think one of the areas that I think that's very, very useful for teenagers is to have other figures in their life away from their single parent who can give them another perspective. So one thing that teenagers are very, very upset about, I'd say at the moment, is there's a very judgmental world they're in, very right, wrong world. People are judged as they said the wrong thing, they've done the wrong thing. Teenagers live in terror on social media that they'll say the wrong thing, the right thing. And what's helpful about other people being involved, whether that's a godparent or an uncle or a teacher or a sports coach or a therapist or whoever it is, it's lovely to get some different points of view. And I would say that for all parents, not, as I say, not just single parents. So it's like you see a weed, I see a flower. I see a flower, you see a weed. It's not wrong or right. It's just I see it differently to you. And on so many issues, we just do look at things differently. And it's to step away from this very judgmental world. And I think my advice to single parents headed to the teenage years is if they can find a way to sort of introduce other perspectives as much as they can, and that your perspective is one perspective, it just helps them feel the world is a less judgmental place, and to be less judgmental of themselves, and not to
Yeah.
view themselves as wrong. Because we've
Yeah.
got the sort of starting point for a lot of mental health problems for teenagers is they start with this very negative inner voice, and they feel themselves to be wrong. So we want to open things up, step away from right, wrong, different perspectives, different ways of doing things. Just as you said, your friends' parents, they'd be there at a drop of a hat. Other parents, they're never going to be a taxi service. This dad thinks that, this mum thinks that, this person, that sense of variety and different ways of looking at the world. I'd say that's a really helpful guide to going into adolescence.
I love that, Rachel. There is so much that's so great about all of this information. I am definitely going to, I know, come back to this episode myself, time and time again, to make sure that it all really, really lands.
I can tell. Look, I'm going goosebumpy. I'm very interested in energies, and I can just, it's going to be fabulous. I think you're going to have a great time. I really do. I
Thank
really
you.
do. And maybe we can talk in a few years' time.
Yes,
and you'll
please.
say,
Yes,
you were
please. I'm going
right.
to have you on speed dial. I'm going to be like, Rachel.
Yeah, you say you were right.
It's 10 p.m. He's not home. But finally, Rachel, is there anything for, what is the most important message that you want anyone reading your book, The Gift of Teenagers, to take away?
If I had my time again, so I'm that bit older. I've raised my teenagers now. The book does reflect my own experience to an extent, but it also respects a lot of research. What I would say was, it goes in a flash. You won't believe it at the time. And if you can just change the lens from thinking, I wish this was over, to thinking, you know what, I've so much to learn and to grow and to enjoy through this period. And I'm learning and growing, and I'm growing up too, and I'm growing up alongside my teenagers. And you know what, I'm going to have a really good time, because when it's over, you're just longing for them to still want to hang out with you and come on holiday with you, and you've got the chance to build that relationship. So just enjoy and just have the expectation you're going to have a fabulous time.
Amazing. I love that. Well, this is Rachel's book here. I'm holding it up to the camera, but yeah, thank you so much, Rachel. It's such important work you're doing. I feel really, really passionate about it, really behind it. And I hope that everyone who has a teenager or a child buys your book and listens to your advice, because it's definitely brilliant advice, and it's a gift to teenagers that you're that you're putting this out there. So thank you.
My pleasure. My absolute pleasure.
So where can people find you?
I'm on social media, Rachel Kelly Wellbeing. I'm on Instagram and Facebook, and you can find the book at Waterstones and Amazon and bookshops. And I'd love to get feedback. I'm still got so much more to learn and grow, and and do get in touch, and love to hear from you on social media or wherever. And let me know your experience.
Brilliant.
What's working.
Thank you, Rachel. And I am definitely going to, as I say, keep you on speed dial, because this is so important. And I know the Frollo community. I just know that this is, there's so many parents all parents in the Frollo community care so much about doing the best job we can by our kids. So the work you're doing is important. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone for listening to another episode of the Frollo podcast. And that's a wrap for this week. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. If you did, then I have one small favour to ask. Please can you take a minute to subscribe to the Frollo podcast and give us a rating and review? This really helps other single parents who might benefit from it find us. The Frollo app, which is fully user verified for user safety, is available on the Google Play Store and the App Store, and you can find out more info and download links at www.frollo.com or follow us on Instagram at Frollo app. And you can purchase your copy of our book, How to Be a Happy Single Parent, at all the major book retailers. Until next time, have a great week.